This is your government video for Brutus No. 1. Brutus No. 1 is an anti-federalist papers. And I know most of the time we talk about the Federalists being the ones who wrote these essays in New York newspapers. But the anti-federalists caught on as well and started writing a series of papers. Brutus No. 1 is probably the most famous of these. It is also required reading for the AP test. So, as part of your reading, this video is meant to be read after you've completed the Brutus No. 1 reading. There's a reading guide online. If you pull it up, there's a hip portion at the top, and then you take notes in the annotation pane. Brutus No. 1 has already been pre-highlighted for you in order to point out the most important parts. Once you've done that, if you watch this video, I want to highlight a couple of super important parts about Brutus No. 1 that are particularly important for the AP test. Brutus No. 1 represents the main issues that anti-federalists felt were problematic about the Constitution. Remember, the anti-federalists do not want to ratify the Constitution, and one of their main issues is that they believe that the federal government created was too large, or that there was not enough checks and balances to make sure that the federal government remained small and allowed the state governments to do most of the work. And there's two really controversial, even to this day, controversial parts of the Constitution. The first one is called the National Supremacy Clause. The National Supremacy Clause says in general that if federal and state governments disagree, the federal government is supreme. This is not a completely true and accurate statement, and certainly the courts have mitigated differences between federal government and state government. But if a federal government passes a law and a state government passes a law, and those two laws contradict each other, in certain times, then the federal government is supreme over the states, and the state cannot pass laws that would disagree with federal laws. Now, according to the Constitution, this is only in certain areas. It just so happens that those areas are major national importance. So the anti-federalists believe that the Supremacy Clause will give the federal government tons of power to negate things that the states really want to do and thus limit states' power. The next clause is arguably the most controversial part of the Constitution. It is in Article 1, Section 8, which is the article that talks about federal Congress's power. And it's called the Necessary and Proper Clause. It says that Congress has the power to make any laws that it deems necessary and proper. The wording of this particular phrase means that Congress is allowed to devise any law that they deem is necessary to get the business of the federal government done. Well, you know, that there's a lot of interpretation that can go on there. And what if they believe that that is trampling on states' rights or adding more and more departments to the government, even in areas that the states were normally in power? These two clauses together are very scary for anti-federalists because they believe it enhances federal power and restricts the right both of the people's individual liberties and the state government's power.